Hi everyone, welcome to our Claris FileMaker training course on how to build a custom CRM in 30 days. This training is designed primarily for beginners or those of you who need kind of a refresher with the Claris FileMaker platform. Over the course of 30 days, we're going to spend about an hour each day covering topics from the very basics of the Claris FileMaker platform in terms of the tools, the products, deployment, security, all those things you need to know about as you build a custom application. So keep in mind that towards the beginning of the training, the topics are more basic in nature. And as we get towards the end of the training, they're somewhat more advanced. I would say probably intermediate level topics. Now keep in mind this special part of this training is that while we're not only talking about the FileMaker platform, we're talking how you can rapidly customize an existing free CRM that you can download today. It's unlocked. So taking that CRM and customizing it to your organization's particular needs. Now, a couple important links to keep in mind. One is that if you need a copy of FM Starting Point, the free Unlock CRM, visit fmstartingpoint.com and press the button, and then our system will shoot you an email with the current links to that CRM. If you're looking for additional FileMaker training, visit fmtraining.tv and press the bundles button, and that will allow you to get more of this highly animated and somewhat energetic training material to help you through the learning process with the Claris FileMaker platform. Lastly, if you have questions about the FileMaker platform or you're looking for some additional help, maybe some one-on-one coaching help, feel free to email us at support@rcconsulting.com.
This week, we are basically discussing how to build a CRM in 30 days for total beginners, for people who want to refresh, people who are like, I know a lot of things about the FileMaker platform, but I might have some gaps, or I could use a refresher because I get so, bogged down in other stuff, or, you've spent so long developing, you have a hard time explaining to customers, like, what, a beginning look at things is sometimes. That's what we're here to do. And we are happy to be doing it. Today is day 6, which is one of the most interesting aspects of the FileMaker platform. We are doing relationships, and that tends to be where people get really tripped up. So we have 3 days of this. Before you're like, who is this lady? Who is she talking? I'm Margaret. I am the assistant. Richard is out today due to having other business requirements to deal with, which means that we have Calvin. See, this is Calvin. He is currently very tiny, but I'll make him a bit larger. There we go. Hello, Calvin. Calvin is one of our fantastic
afternoon.
Engineers. How long have you been working for RCC, Calvin? I don't remember. Almost as long as I can.
Over 10 years.
Yeah, over a decade. Calvin is absolutely fantastic. He's done many training sessions with us, both on beginning and advanced topics for our regular day-to-day live streams. He's a fantastic trainer. And actually, he'll be showing up again, I think, next way on, Wednesday, Thursday? Is that the 2 days? Yeah, so he'll be back again to help us out, and probably maybe some other points during the schedule if RC is busy. What are we doing today? Where are we starting? Or better question, what is a relationship? What do they do in FileMaker?
So today we're going to be looking just at basic relationships in the FileMaker platform. And relationships are really a powerful aspect of the app that really makes FileMaker, it makes the database relational. And it gives you the ability to take information from one table and then connect it to information in another table. Through that relationship. So Richard has this wonderful definition for what he calls a relationship. Relationships for normal people. When describing your business process, you should be able to identify the elements that you need to track customers, contract pieces of machinery, projects, employees, orders, payments, and the relationship is the connection between any two groups of these elements. So you could say a customer can have a contract, and a contract can involve one or more pieces of machinery. A customer can have a project, and on and on. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to switch to sharing my screen, and we're going to start with a brand new empty FileMaker file and walk through what the relationships look like.
There we go.
And so you should see my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and open up FileMaker. So I'm looking at FileMaker Pro, and I'm going to go to File, Create New. And for at least to start, I'm just going to start with a blank file. Put this on my desktop. It's called Entitled. But one of the scenarios that we like to use for creating relationships and looking at that is the student and the idea of students in a school. So let's call this one student. So we've got the table called student, and we're going to call, and I was supposed to rename that one. And I will say don't save. Okay, so we want to change this one to student, and I am going to change that. And let's go ahead and go to browse mode. So here we've got a flat table. There's only one field in it, and it's called student. So I'm going to put in a name in here. We'll call this student John. Let's create a new record, and this is Glenn, and we'll do one is Joan. Okay, so we've got 3 records in here, and we don't have, there's no, it's a single table, and that's all that we have. And so there's nothing for it to connect to. Let's add another table, and we'll call this one maybe grades. And for this, we will give it a student. We'll put a student in there and just start with that. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. So let me go ahead and show this. So we've got one table here, which is student. And let's jump over to grades. And we've got a second table called grades, and let's actually put a field in here called grade. And I'm going to stick this on here. So we'll say that John, I think there was a John, he had a 95, and we had, who was another person? Is there Bob? He had a 90, I think there was a Joan, and she had a 96. Okay, so here we've got three records in our grades, and we've got 3 records in students. Let me go ahead and just change the name here so it matches. And how are we going to get these to relate? So just you can set up a relationship based on almost any field in FileMaker. And in this case, just to show you how those connections work, we're going to use the student name. Let's go ahead. We're going to go to File, Manage, Database. And we've been looking at the fields area and the tables area. Let's jump over to relationships. Now we'll see that we have an untitled. Let's go ahead and change that to student. And we have a grades. So there's two separate tables here, and they have to connect them. We have to build this relationship. So I'm going to grab, just for the sake of illustration, I'm going to grab the student and the student name from one side and join it to the student name on the other side. So now we've got this relationship based on student, and you'll notice I just reached across and grabbed it. Now, if I double click on this equals, it will tell us a little information about this relationship. So it's based on one field called student, and we can have this actually based on multiple fields, but for now we're just going to base it on that. And we have these other options to allow creation of record via the relationship, delete records in this table when a record is deleted in the other, or sort records. For now, I'm going to leave these alone. We'll visit them later. Say go ahead, OK, and OK again. And now I have created this relationship. Now there aren't any changes here on the layout. So let me go ahead and make a change, and I'm going to use my portal button and put it on the layout. And when you create a portal, you're allowed to select any related tables. There's only one related table. I'll select grades. And we're not looking too much into the portal options, but I'm going to go ahead and say go into browse mode. Now here, we'll see that we have John, and he has 1 grade, and it's 95. Glenn, that was the name. He doesn't have any grades, and Joan has a 96. And so we'll notice in 2 of these records, something showed up. In 1, there's no data related. And so nothing showed up there. Let me go ahead and make this smaller, and I'm going to make my layout smaller so we can see a little more on the window at one time. And I'm going to open a new window and then jump over to grades. And since this is what we would call, in this case, we would call this a child table, because the main table is the students, and this would be the child table. I'm going to change it to a table view so we can see a bunch of data at once. And you'll notice that we can see the relationship is based on these names. Now let me change the name John, and we're going to change his name to Jon. And you'll notice as soon as that changed, because the name was based on that field, that data disappeared. So, but if it matches John, then it will appear, because that relationship is based on the student name. If we break that relationship, if we change that data, like I changed it from the spelling of the name John, then it broke the relationship and it wasn't working. If I delete this relationship right now and say, okay, my portal won't go anywhere, but it won't work anymore. So let's go ahead and put that back on. Say student to student. Okay. Now so we can have multiple records in here based on one of these people. So let's go ahead and put another one for John. And this time he wasn't doing so good. He got a 70. And now we'll see that as he has more related records, we'll get more records in the portal, and that list will continue. Do we have any questions at this point before we start looking at the other options for these records, for relationships?
Kind of. I'm gonna put this one to you. I'm not quite sure.
Mm-hmm.
How do you create a relational database from a flat file?
Yeah, great question. So I'd be curious about the use case, what specific use case, because depending
importing
on
an Excel worksheet, I think was one they gave. So it's like
right,
you get a ton of info in Excel.
So this is actually something that we have happen a lot, where we take a flat file like a FileMaker file, or like an Excel file, and we have to put it in FileMaker and break it up into a relational format. So one of the ways that you might that is one of the possibilities of having a flat file is maybe you have a list of clients or contacts, and each is assigned to a company, and and you want to take that flat file and put it in FileMaker as a relational database. And so we would have to create a script that would loop through, and you'd import the records into one table or another, probably the contacts table. Then you would loop through and create related companies for each of the contacts. And if the company already exists, you would just assign it to the existing record, which that could be a whole conversation there. But good question. I'm going to, if there are no other questions at this time, I'm going to continue to make an adjustment to this relationship to show other options.
Really fast one. Someone wanted to know where Glenn went. I think you just changed his name, correct?
Yeah, so we're looking at 2 different tables. This is a really great observation, because this can really trip us up sometimes. And so this is the grades table. And what I'm going to do is create a new layout. I'm going to call this one students, and I'm going to make this one a table view. So I'm going to say student table view and finish it. I'm just going to put just student on there. And let's go ahead and open this. So we're looking at 3 different layouts all at once. Oops. And let's look at the grades table as well. Okay, so you can tell we've got grades here. There's the name grades. We've got students table view here. So here's John, Glenn, and Joan. And here are our grades. These are the students. These are the grades. John, Bob, Joan, John. Now, the Glenn, I didn't delete him, but he doesn't have any grade information there. So there's nothing to show up. And so sometimes we would call this an this record Bob's grade of 90. We would call that an orphan record because it doesn't have a parent. As soon as we go to students, I'll say Control or Command N to create a new record and type in Bob. As soon as we create that, then Bob's grades will show up. So thank you for pointing that out. But that is a problem that we can run to sometimes in these in our apps. Any other questions?
Yes. Is there a preference in naming the table student or students?
Yeah, we're going to get more into naming the tables and table occurrences probably tomorrow, but that's usually I would say students, and it's as a plural because it's all of the students. But when it comes to naming conventions, people should take a convention and stick to it. Usually, if there's an app and it's using singular across the board, then I would stick with singular. And if you're using plural, then I would stick with plural. Good questions.
Okay. I think we're good to go. We have kind of one, but that's kind of like more of like an end of today question, Keith.
Okay. So we'll come back to that. So the next thing I'd like to do is take a look. So we related this by the name, but let's say that there's some problems with the name. So for example, say Bob is here and his real name is Robert, and now he wants to go by Robert. And as soon as I change his name to Robert, the relationship has broken because we changed that record. So it's not really best practices to base relationships on names. That it was more illustrative to show how the relationship works. Another option is to use an ID. So I'm going to call this one serial number and create a new field here. And we're going to call this serial number. And we will generate it on creation. And the next value will be 1, and we'll increment by 1. Okay. And let me go back to my table view. I'm going to add my serial number to the student layout. Got to make sure we're on the right layout. Let's go ahead and add serial number. And here I'm going to select records, replace field contents, and we're going to use the serial number options that are there. So now each of these students has a number. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we can base the grades, instead of being based on a name that a user can edit, we can base it on a serial number, which we would have hidden in the background. No one would see it, or usually we wouldn't see it, and nobody could edit it. Even if they could see it, we wouldn't let them edit it. So let's go ahead and add the serial number, and we're going to call this one student serial number, and create that. Now, one thing you'll notice when I was in the students, I made this an Autoenter serial number. And in grades, I am leaving it as just a regular text field. And the difference is that in a child table like grades, we would want this not to be an Autoenter calculation because we're going to set it and ourselves. And it's not something that's going to increment on its own. This is what we would call a foreign key. Sometimes you'll see it prefixed with FK for foreign key, and we have different naming ways to to point that out. Usually, and if you look in our sample file FM starting point, we start all of the IDs, ID, and then what kind of ID. But I'm just leaving the serial number so we understand it's a serial number. We're going to say OK. And now let's put this on the grade. And I will put in the student serial number. And so these will need to be set. And what I'm going to do here is set them based on, so let's go ahead and just clear the names. So we won't base them by the student name. We're going to base them by a serial number. So we'll just go 1, 2, 3, and 3. So one student, Joan, will have 2 records, and the other 2 will just have 1. So you'll notice also that we've got one, because it's a one-to-many relationship, one student will have many grades. But though we changed those, we haven't changed the data structure in relationships. Let's go ahead and change that. So now I'm going to change student to be based on the serial number for the student to the student serial number in grades. Let's go ahead and change, say OK, and OK. Now, when we look at these records, we'll see Joan, because her ID, that serial number, Joan, matches on 2 records, then we see her 2 grades in here. We can also look at Glenn. He has 1 record, the ID matches in 1 case. And finally, John has 1 as well. So in this case, we switched it to being based on serial numbers instead of the name. Now the serial number is better than a name because it doesn't change and it's hidden in the background. Do we have any questions about this adjustment we made, basing the relationship on a number instead of a name?
Question from Mickey D. Could you use, people are asking about keys. Some of you I think are a little ahead of us. We're going to get there. I think today, right? Primary keys? Or is that?
Yeah, so good question. I didn't call it a key, but this serial number would be a foreign key, while the student serial number would be a primary key. And I wanted to set this up ourselves just to show how that would work for a serial number, because serial numbers are easier to follow than FileMaker's default primary key. So if I go back, so let's switch over to talking about what FileMaker's, when you create a table, you'll notice that there were these, I believe, 5 different default fields that were created when we just said new table. And that's primary key, but in their case, what they use is an Autoenter calculation get UUID. And this is probably the best way to have it set up, but not necessarily the easiest to follow. So here, if I show the primary key, this is a long list of text and numbers and dashes. And so it's a little harder to show the connection. But we could have it based on this key instead. And this is what we would prefer to do. And nobody ever sees the primary key. It's hidden in the background. It's not going to change. So that's what makes it better in that respect. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Student serial number shouldn't be a number format instead of text? Question mark.
Yeah, so good question. So it could be a number, but often, so one of the reasons why I wouldn't have it as a number, if we go over to students, oftentimes, I don't often actually see a number in a serial number field. We might see something like this. Oops. ST for student, and then a number. So I'm going to say OK. And now when I create a new student, let's go over here and create the new student. the next number, it has this prefix of the ST and the zeros and the 5. And when we get up to 10, you'll notice that it just at increments by 10, it recognizes that there's those preceding circles. Now zeros. So I wouldn't necessarily put that as the serial number as a number field. And what I would actually prefer using as a primary key. So let's go ahead and try, the UUID as a primary key. So let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to go back over here to student serial number, and I'm going to call this one, I'll say ID student, and just so you can see, I'll put FK for foreign key. So there it kind of explains everything that's going on with that ID field. And then in student, instead of calling it primary key, I'm just going to call it ID student, and I'll put PK for primary key. And you'll notice this is a unique identifier of each record in this table. I'll say okay. And so we'll notice here, this is so we'll notice that each record has a primary key. Even the grades have primary keys, but we won't base any relationships on those primary keys. Now let me put the primary key, the ID student primary key, on here, and you'll notice it's a little harder to follow looking at these. So I'm just going to copy one, and I'm not going to change all of these, and I'll put that number in there and go back to the relationship. Let's update this to be based on the UUID instead. And now we see John's grade shows up here when those IDs match. I'm going to select replace field contents and just replace everything with the same ID. And now we'll see all of those grades over here belong to John. And here we're basing it on the UUID, which we would not want this to be. This would need to be text, not a number. And we're generating that relationship based on that. So we've looked at 3 different options for setting up a relationship based on a text field name, based on a serial number, or based on a UUID. And obviously the name was just for illustrative purposes to see how it works. The serial number and the UUID is the better option for setting up your app. Do we have any other questions before we move on to the looking at the different relationship options?
Yes. As I understand it, the primary key is unique to each entry in the database table, so what use is it?
Can you say that one more time?
Yes. As I understand it, the primary key is unique to each entry in the database table, so what use is it?
Okay, yeah, that's why it's useful, because it's unique. So if we look at John's record here, he has this primary key, this UUID that starts with 278D and keeps going. No other record will have that primary key in the app. So when we take that ID and assign it to a number of grades as the foreign key, then we will know that those records belong to John. And maybe we have another table, like let's go ahead and add another table here. And let's go ahead and say, we'll say manage database, and let's call this new table notes. And we'll say there's a note here, and we want an ID student, we'll call it foreign key. And we'll go ahead and just set up the relationship, right, like this. And now you'll see both tables, grades and notes, is we know which notes belong to John. We know which grades belong to John based on the ID, the foreign key, the student foreign key in each case. Let's go ahead and say okay. And there's our note. I'm going to just put the field note on there. And this is the next thing I wanted to look at here is the different options that we have in Managed Database for the notes. Now, it wouldn't really be that easy to go through and copy this UUID or remember a serial number when we're creating a related record. So let's see what happens when I go to a note and I set this checkbox to true. Allow creation of records in this table via this relationship. So let's go ahead and say, check that, say okay. And now you'll see that my new notes portal, let me give myself a little more space so we can see the difference there. We'll just say, we've got grades up here, and we've got notes here. Browse. So there's not, it looks like there might be a record here, but there isn't. And that's just giving us a line that we can type into right away. So let me go ahead and say, John pays attention. That's his note. Now you'll notice as soon as I clicked out and committed the record, it created, it displayed this next line where we can put in a second note. Now, if I open up the notes table and we're going to say open and view as a table view, we see our note and we see the foreign key is already in there, our ID. Now, if we base this on, let's go ahead and just change this and see what happens if we base this on, instead of the UUID, we base on the serial number. Now that broke the existing record, so it's no longer connected to this one. But if we type this in and we say, John needs to work harder, and I'll click out to commit the record, immediately that record was created over here. And because the new record was based on the relationship, the data in the ID student foreign key field was automatically entered. So this is a really powerful tool for creating records through relationships, creating records really fast as well. Do we have any questions about using the create records via relationship feature for auto entering those foreign key fields?
Yes, if allow creation is checked and is creating related records from the students to the grade table, is the child table foreign key an auto enter and student serial number?
That's a great question. No, it's not. So if we go over here to the foreign key, we'll see that it's indexed. That's important for the relationship to work, but it's not an auto enter. The relationship essentially acts as an auto enter. Now, if we wanted to do another, say, we can talk about auto enters another time, but whatever that relationship is based on has to be true. So let's do another one. Let's say that we want, we'll say, let's go ahead and go back to notes and say student. So this is going to be the student name. And here, let's go ahead and update this relationship. I'm just going to double click here and select student and say add. Okay. So now we're looking at, we've got 2 data points that have to be true to make this work. So I'll say, okay. Okay. And you'll notice all the notes disappeared. Let me go ahead, because in this case, if we look over here, that student field, which is new, is not, there's no data in it. Because that relationship doesn't match for the student field, then it doesn't work. Let me go ahead and say, John needs to take a hike. I commit the record, and it automatically creates the record, sets the foreign key to what we're using as the primary key for the relationship, and then automatically enters that student name through the relationship because it matches the relationship. Now, this isn't necessarily the best way to have the student name auto-populate. I would prefer using a lookup field, because if I delete John's name here, now this data is still about John, I still want it to show up, but as soon as I commit it, because John's name is not here, it won't work. So if both things have to be true in the relationship for the relationship to work. So let's look at that one more time. Here we've got two requirements: the serial number and the ID have to be true for the relationship to work. Good question about the auto enter. Anything else?
Would it be a good practice to add a date record created, and can it be auto entered on creation?
Yeah, that's a great, it's so important that FileMaker automatically adds it there for you. So the creation timestamp, if we look at that over here, it doesn't really come too much into when we're talking about relationships, but this field is so important that when you create a new table, by default, FileMaker adds it for you. So the creation timestamp, which is a date and time, exists in the background, and it is entered, and it was entering all the time while we were working on those other things. Good question. Any other questions?
You're good to go.
Okay. So let's look at some of the other options for setting up the relationship. And so you'll notice when we look in here that in both cases, we're just using an equals option. But we've got a few other options here. We have a does not equal, is less than or equal to, is greater than or equal to, or this Cartesian join. We're going to go ahead and say OK. And let's go ahead and look at each of those options from a little bit of a different perspective. So here, what I'm going to do is, so we've got this record of this table of students, and maybe what we want to do, and we've got students, we've got grades, and we've got students, grades, and notes. So let me go ahead and I'm going to change these to make it a little more interesting. So everything's just not related to John. I'm going to change this. Let's just say replace. We'll give John a couple records. Obviously, you'd want this to just be auto enter. And then we'll give Glenn a record. Oops. And we'll give Robert a record. Okay, so now we've got there. I just wanted a little more variety in the table. Now let's go ahead and create a new relationship. So we're seeing grades just for John in here. I'm going to call this one grades for current student. And I'm going to add another table, or a table occurrence, that is going to be called grades. But let's say we'll call this one more grades. And here I'm going to base it on a new field. So sometimes we can use these relationships to search data. So maybe we want to see John's and we want to compare it, John's records, and we want to compare it to everybody else across the board. So here we will go to student. And I'm going to create a global field and call it global grade filter or something like that. And this one is going to be a number. And let me go back to grades, and I'm just going to make sure. Now, our grade here is a text field. I do want this one to be a number. And we'll go back over here, and I want to base it on the global grade filter. Let me just make sure that this is actually a global, and global means it will just be the same value in each area. And let me go ahead. I'm going to move my notes off to the side and put a new portal down here and base this on the more grades. And I want to see the grade and the student. So here I'm kind of interested in both aspects there. And I'm going to put my filter field right here, which is the global filter field. Okay, so you'll notice that there's nothing in this field right now that I can see. There's no data in this field, so the relationship isn't working. Now let me just double check how this is set up. So I had the grade filter has to equal. Now if I put in 95, we'll see everything that has a 95 through that relationship. If I put 90, we'll see everything that has a 90. Now, because we're only basing this on the grade itself, if I put in, oops, I changed his grade. So if I put in 96, we'll see that John has a grade of 96 and Glenn does. Now, this isn't really very interesting because we're looking for exacts. Let's say we want to see everything that's greater than. So change. So now through this relationship, if I put in 50, I see everybody did better than 50. And let me see if I put in 95, we'll see there's 2 records that are 95. So maybe we want to look at his average, which would be 95.5, and compare that to across the board. How does he compare to other students? Now, if we put this down to 70, we'll notice we've got 3 grades. Now, because we did greater than and not greater than or equals to, we're not seeing that 70. But we can also do greater than or equal to. Change. Say OK. And now when we say 70, it appears there. If we do 71, that 4th record doesn't appear. So in this case, we can do filters based on something greater than or even less than. Let's go ahead and change it to, or this was less than. If we change it over here, it's greater than. And so now we're seeing anything that is below this number. So now we put in 70, we see there's only one person below the 70. Do we have any questions about using a greater than or less than options in the relationship?
Not so much about that, though we do have a quick question about something else. Can you give an example of a Cartesian relationship? When is it useful?
Yeah, so that was the next thing that I was going to show. So the Cartesian relationship is useful more often in a building an app for different features in the app, not so much the data structure itself. So when I do a Cartesian join, that means it will display everything. So here we'll see all of our records, no matter what the value is in them. So here I just created a new record, and I don't have scrolling enabled. Let me enable scrolling in this. Allow vertical scrolling. So now you're going to see all those records, even if it's blank. There's no data to relate it to, but it's there. So it shows up. if we go to, and it doesn't matter what fields it's based on. Right now it's based on field. Usually I'll base it on primary key just so it doesn't look confusing, or so you won't think, oh, is there a reason why it's that the grade field? But no, any record we create in here will show up, and we have to commit it though. So now we see all those records in there, and and such. And when we change them over here, they appear here. So one way that I use Cartesian joins is like for if I use a popover with a portal for selecting records, and maybe I want to select a student to create a new grade record. We could use a Cartesian to do that. So let me go ahead and do that. So here we have the grade table, and maybe I'm a teacher and I want to create new records. So I will have this portal, and it's on let's hit cancel here. I guess what I would want to do here is I'm looking at grades right now, and I want to look at students. So what I'm going to do is add a new students, and I'm going to call this one all students, because it's going to be Cartesian. Change that. By default, the relationship is in equals, but I'll change it to Cartesian. Say OK. And so here I am on my grades table. I'm going to move this to all students. Say OK. Didn't give me the dialog to select what fields I wanted, so I'm going to do that again. Say OK. And I'm just grabbing the student name, and I'm going to put in a really basic button. We're not getting into scripting now. I'm just going to say set. And the single step is set field. And we're going to set the foreign key. And the value that we're going to set is the student primary key. Say OK. And so now, let me go ahead and make this, OK. So now this doesn't have a student assigned to it. Let me go ahead and put that foreign key field on here. So here we don't have a student assigned. So I can set it to John, or I can set it to Glenn, I can set it to Joan, Robert, or any of the students that are in here. Let's put Abby. And so any of these students I can use the Cartesian join to see all of the students and choose which one I want to assign to this given grade. So if I set it to, so I'm going to call this one 99.9999. And if I set it to Glenn, it doesn't show up here. But if I set it to John, save, it shows up under John's record. So in this case, the Cartesian join isn't so much about relating data, it's about showing you all the data from one perspective, from it's almost like a global view. You're seeing all the data from wherever you are in the relationship. Any follow-up questions on that?
I currently don't see any follow-up questions on that. I have another quick one.
Okay.
Are there any reserved words that cannot be used as field names?
Yeah, that's not quite related. But if I say, get didn't give me a problem. If you say, if you use certain characters like, and it will give you this error message and tell you that the selected name cannot be easily used in calculations formulas because it, and then all the options why it might not. Now you can proceed anyway, and it can mess you up, or it can mess up things in the app. So I wouldn't say you can put anything in there. I would, if you run into anything, it'll give you an error message, and there's better ways of writing those. So I would not, if you run into one of those scenarios, it will give you that error when you try to create the field. Good question.
Okay, other than that, I think you're free to continue.
Okay, so if we go back to our relationship options here, we talked about allow creation of records. We haven't talked about delete related records in this table when a record is deleted in the other. So I'm going to go ahead and check this. And this one's very dangerous. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is if you have multiple relationships or multiple table groups based on the same table. So if I have a student's over here, and actually I'm going to remove this. And so here I have it enable, or I have allow creation. Let me go ahead and duplicate this. And so here I'm going to disable that. Now, if I delete a record, if I go to a table based on student 3 and delete a student record, it will still delete the related grade records because this is checked in another table group. This is not table group specific. This is it applies across the board. So it's something you want to really be careful about. And I will normally just put in cascading deletes or something like that in the table occurrence, because if you're trying to go back and figure out where you had that enabled, then it can be hard to find sometimes, especially if you don't have an app to find it. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Now I enabled it to delete related records. Let's go ahead and go back to this grades table. I'm going to go to the table view. Let's modify this and hide the student. So here we've got John has 3 records because his ID is used in 3 of them, and the rest are not. John has 3. So when I delete John's records here, I duplicated it instead of delete. Okay, let me go back to John. Okay, I'll go to records, delete record. It says permanently delete this entire record. I can cancel or say okay. I'm going to say delete. And you'll notice immediately all of his related records were deleted. Now, if we open up the notes, though, you'll see John's records that we had here are still there, because cascading deletes, the delete record via relationship, is only enabled for grades in this area. So that's why we only saw it in one case. So that's how the cascading deletes work through the relationship. It's something you definitely want to be careful about using. Let's go back to, I'm going to go to grades and turn off cascading deletes. Say allow creation of records via this relationship. Say okay. And now we're looking at Glenn's record. I'm going to give him, he's going to get an 80, a 100. You'll notice as I create these, the records are being created over here, and his ID, the B402, is being entered in the foreign key field to make them relate. Let's allow vertical scrolling so we can add some more records in here. And now you'll notice here, you did really bad on that one. So you'll notice here that these records are appearing here in the order that they were entered. We entered the 96, then the 80, and then the 100, 30, 60, which from a user's perspective is a little confusing because I don't see why they're in this order. Well, because if we had a date or a timestamp, we would see that it was in ascending order by the time it's created. Now, if I go to the relationship, I have the option to sort the records. So let's say we're sorting it. I'll say grade, and we're going to sort it in ascending order. Okay, okay. Now we've got 30, 60, 80, 96, 100. Now it's in ascending order. If I put in a new record here and say 91, as soon as I commit it, the 91 jumps up to the sort, to the right sort order. I can also change this to descending, so we see the best grades at the top. So now we see 100, 96, 91. We're going in descending order. And it can be any field in the table that we want to, that we select to show that, we can use it for the sorting. So that's pretty straightforward. The sorting is the same sort that we see if we hit Control Command S, and see it's the same sort dialog that we would see in that case. That covers about everything I had for the introduction to relationships. Tomorrow we're going to talk about some different techniques. Now you'll notice that this is not a very pretty relationship graph right here, and I'd be a little ashamed for any of you to see it, so or put my name on it. But so tomorrow we're going to talk about anchor buoy, the relationship diagram, and how to organize the relationship to make it real easy to work with and easy to read.
Okay, with that being said, thank you very much, Calvin. This has been fantastic. Oh, there's a quick question.
Okay.
Can you quickly show how you set up the global field again?
The global field. So this is the global field right here, and it's just kind of a selector field. And the reason why it's global, now I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to go to browse mode over here and paste it in. Go to, I'm sorry, what is this? Form view, and paste it over here. So we see we have the same field in a number of different locations and a number of different records. I should show you what record we're on in each of these cases. So what the global field means is that no matter what record I'm on, and notice I scroll through all these records, the data is the same. I'm going to change it to 90. I scroll through all the records, the data is the same. Even in other tables, it's the same. As soon as I changed it from 90, or from 100 to 90, now to 91, you'll notice in all the other fields, other windows, it changed as well. So a global field can be referenced no matter where you are in the relationship graph. The relationship doesn't have to exist. And so if we look at, say, that Cartesian join over here, or not the Cartesian, the more grades one, I delete that and I go back over here, you'll notice I don't see any data because that relationship doesn't exist anymore. If the fields are actually on the layout, it's going to say unrelated table. Now, if we are looking at it, if we use a global field, it's no matter where you put it, even if it's unrelated, it will still display data, but it's only one value for the entire app. In all records, all tables for that field. It will only show that one value. So the way that was set up, if I go to here and I'll select the field, select options, and the third option over is the storage, and I have the option to select global storage. And I can turn that off, or I can turn it back on. Maximum, you can have a global field with multiple repetitions, but indexing doesn't work because there's only one value in there. So the indexing wouldn't really make sense. Now, another thing about global fields is you can use them in a relationship like I used it on more grades for that filter, but you can't have a global field on the child side of a relationship. It doesn't really make sense and it wouldn't work. So the global field would work on the parent side where you're starting from, but not on the child side where you're looking to. So that's kind of a recap on the how to set up a quick recap on how to set up a global field and where it can and can't be used on the relationship graph. Good question. And any other questions before we finish wrapping it up?
Yes, kind of an interesting one. These table occurrences are unique to FileMaker. What is the philosophy of when to use them? Like, I guess
table occurrences are unique to FileMaker.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I believe there are. Go ahead.
I was about to say, I think the question is, when do you decide something is a table?
Oh, when do you decide something is a table versus should it be just part of? Should you have it in an existing table, or should it have its own table?
Yeah.
Is that what we're saying?
I think that's what it's.
Yeah. So that gets down to what you're thinking and what makes sense. So one thing in FM starting point that we do is we have all of the contact information, emails, phone numbers, etc., all in the contact table. Other apps, some other FileMaker apps will have a related table with maybe just phone numbers. So you could have the phone numbers all in a related table. This is the mobile, and you maybe have a type field where you say if it's a mobile, a home, a fax, etc. I've seen some where all the contact points are in a related table. This one's an email. This one's a phone number. This one's a fax. This one's their Instagram. So it's really that's where it gets into a kind of the developer's preference or your preference. Something like notes. Sometimes I'll see a giant note field in the contact or in the student or contacts table instead of using related records, and that can become just a little tedious to take care of, and it's really hard to search if it's a really big ongoing note. So if you've run into issues and it's just tedious to keep track of in one table, maybe it belongs in its own table. Any other questions?
Kind of related to that, but I think when do you group tables together?
I think we're talking about table groups now, and I'm going to let that wait for tomorrow because that's what tomorrow's about.
Yes, that will be tomorrow's discussion. With that being said, I think we're pretty close to being good then.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us as we took a look at relationships, an intro look to relationships.
Yes, no, thank you very much, everyone. It's been fantastic. So with that being said, thank you everyone so much for coming, and I'm gonna run the closing credits.